Hi everyone, Mature Simmer here. Welcome back to generational farming. So we're here in spring, finally, in April. It might have been too sharp of a turn. It looks like it worked. I was worried after bumping that tree that it might have really knocked me out of alignment, but it didn't. So we're probably going to get our friend lag in the beginning here pretty soon. So I'm just kind of prepared. So let's see. And there we do have our friend lag. So he's Scandinavian, because wouldn't that be the way lag would? I don't know. It sounds like a Scandinavian name. Maybe I'm just being goofy. Let me get my line set. First turn it on, and then we'll come do what we need to here. Get ourselves back. And that little tuft of nothing is just not worth it. So if it doesn't, it got it right there where we laid it down. So we tricked it, and then it worked. So, year 9, here we are. Moving along, no notice yet about leaving, but I don't know, maybe at this point, because, like, obviously it'd be into the spring of year 10, would be a year from now. Maybe it's just like, well, we're not going to announce anything, you're just going to be done at the end of next year. So in 23 days, I guess, because but again, sometimes it leaves in winter 1. So sometime in 12 plus days, but probably less than 23 days. How about that? That would be to stay within the initial confines of generational farming. That should be the farthest we go. So that would give us 10 full years, and then we move off, and then typically it took 3-4 days for them to move us onto a new map. So we'll see how everything plays out, if it plays out that way or not. Again, not hearing a lot. Haven't been a lot of things. The biggest news we have in FSN, which may be big, really big for me, depending on how it really plays out. Taxes once again are returning. And I say once again because taxes have kind of been one of those things in FSN that come and go. Maybe we've had, in the U.S. model, maybe we've just been having warring Republican and Democratic administrations, and the Republicans come in and cancel all our taxes, and then the Democrats come back and put them all back. I don't know. Taxes are a necessary thing, but I guess if we're certainly in a model of, to some degree, taxation without representation. There's not really any kind of a say on what the tax structure is. It's kind of determined, well, it's not kind of determined, it's determined by leadership as to what it will be. And my concern and why it could be a big thing or not is, if I'm understanding it correctly, and I've not been told anything with questions that I've asked that I'm not, it may just siphon money out for someone like me who isn't just pounding the heck out of the game and doing a million things, because the tax isn't based on income, which I get would be a challenge, because in essence you'd have to go to almost like the financial audit system, which to some degree is something that we had in FSN, where it would be like, hey, go out to this farm, tell me what their value is, and so forth. So I suppose we do have a mechanism and a model designed that would allow us to do that. Because basically the challenge we've got is if it's not based on income, when you're not just pounding things out and using every last inch of your property, the model, at least as I understand it, is a little challenging to someone like me. So basically, rather than confuse the heck out of you with all the options, because it's different for the different game types. So we have 24-day servers, 12-day servers, generational servers, enhanced realism servers, and on generational farming we're going to be getting some kind of taxes too, which obviously is going to change the generational farming dynamic as well, and could have a similar impact because I'm not using all of my land here. Obviously, I'm mowing half of my grass because I don't have time to mow all the grass. So, so therefore, the assumption of what I could make, and that to me is kind of how the model is designed, is there's this assumption of, well, you've got X acres, and if I take some percentage of your money, then that'll be okay because it's this percentage. But to me, it kind of might have been created in a vacuum. And so in our sense, our base rate is 3.5% of our land value. And so in my other situation, I have $2 million of land, but if you've seen my Misty Hills series, the base FSN series that I have here, not generational farming, my bigger field is used for grass, and that grass is not being turned into silage and sold like I'm doing here. It's being turned into silage, but that silage is going into cows, and that takes time. And so I've got years where I don't need to do anything with the grass, as opposed to mowing it 3 times as I am here. So it's a very different dynamic in that situation. But if you do the math, 3.5% of $2 million is $70,000. And on that farm, if I'm lucky on a given year, I'm making about that, 70 to maybe 90 if things go well, and that's it. Now, the taxes are done every 30 days, so that means I've got basically 2.5 game years that I can work. So, I'm paying $70,000 on, something that maybe I'll make, say, double that in, it's in essence, from an income basis, it's in essence at least probably realistically 35 to 40% of my income is gone, which I guess, again, using the U.S. model, and given leadership is in the U.S., I'm imagining there's a little bit of thought in that, so it's not the European model where in some cases it's very high, 60-70% is what I've heard for some European countries is what their taxes are, and people are, but then again, they're provided significantly more services than we are here in the U.S. Like they get, quote unquote free health care, and I say quote unquote because they're paying 70% of taxes. They're paying for their health care. They're just paying through it in taxes. And so it becomes a similar thing. Like if you don't use it, you've now paid for something you're not using, which has always been kind of the challenge in the U.S., where folks are like, if I'm a young, healthy person, I go to the doctor maybe for an annual checkup, if I even do that. And so making me have insurance even, some people will argue like, I'm willing to take the risk because I'm 22 years old and, nothing's going to happen to me for the next 40 years. So I'm just, going to, split the risk in half. And for 20 years, I wouldn't carry insurance. There's absolutely people like that who are like, rather than paying the premiums of, I think in my case it's, like $150 every paycheck, so twice a month, $300 total for the month. So I'm, paying like $3,600, which obviously over 10 years, it's $36,000 that I'd have that I don't have because it's gone toward insurance. And like, we can go down a rabbit hole here that I could talk about for, probably 20 episodes. Just keep going and going and going and going and unwrapping the, peeling back the onion, and here's what this is, here's what that is, and so forth. But anyway, so on top of that then, and this is where it looks even more confusing to me, is then they talk about like the total farm value. The best I can assume that means is we have something called, our total NAV, our total net asset value. And that includes all the savings I have sitting on the FSN server making me money, which is in excess of $4 million. So on top of the land that I have, I also have $4 million in savings, which puts me at $6.5 million. And so there's multipliers based on what you have, all the way up to basically someone who might have 15 million in total farm value, using the terminology in the announcement that we had. And in my case, then, that is a 4 times multiplier. So I take that 3.5% and I multiply it by 4, so I'm now being taxed at 14%. And that's every 30 days. Which once again is, I get it's over, it's 2.5 game years. So, it's a lower rate than than you pay pretty much anywhere in the world. Is one could make that argument, but once again, it's not on income. So it seems to some degree that I'd be penalized for having savings because that increases my total farm value. And I don't know if I'm understanding it correctly on how that's going to work, but I don't know what total farm value means other than that. Because that's our only other number that we have in our accounting ledger on the FSN website. So I've kind of, posted that out there. I'll probably, I'll certainly rehab this conversation in a Misty Hills video. But at this point here, there's not a lot to chat about in generational farming per se. I mean, it's where it's at. It's what time of year we're at. What year we're at, and have we heard any announcements? And then somewhat that's it. Obviously that's not entirely everything, because we've got the big numeric elephant in the room that we haven't talked about yet, which is, where do I stand? 3.36 million, or 3.3 million, you can see up there in the top. And obviously now that's going to slowly churn down as my production silos and the operations of the farm operate throughout the year for the next 6-7 months until I start selling silage again. But obviously we're starting this cycle to go ahead and do that by mowing and then collecting this grass, and I should just have to fertilize. I think I've got at least one more season or one more cutting before I might have to do something with the lime. I'm not sure. Obviously I'll keep an eye on that, and I'll do what I need to do at each point in time. But the most important thing is I really wanted to avoid missing April for my mowing, because otherwise, again, we've still then never caught the time demon that got us that, at this point I think 3 years ago, that I've been chasing this whole time to try to get back to 3 full proper cuts each season, so that I'm maximizing what I can get out of what I'm doing. But, you know, if the tax structure is similar here on generational farming, like, I'm leaving all that field alone, but the land value is going to be included. So to me, that's the challenge. Like, if you're not doing it based on, hey, I had $80,000 in sales of crop, you know, and once again, we've got to keep in mind that 80,000 is profit. So, which is normally how things are figured in most cases. Like, you know, if you're doing an income statement for a business, it's income minus liabilities or payments or debt. So again, buying seed, buying fertilizer, doing all that. You know, the money I make, the only way that number goes up in the top right of the screen is if I'm ultimately having more income than I'm having expenses. You know, but if I get taxed on that, to me that is a model that really brokers no argument, other than if you somehow really want to get into the details of, wow, 3.5% is too much. But I think at that point that wouldn't be a problem. It's like, no, let's go with that. You know, and so I'd rather, if it's like, well, we want to end up that, you know, 50% of what the farmer has goes to taxes, well, then just set the rate that way on my income, but don't, you know, do other weird multipliers and calculations based on things. Because to me, even if it's not my savings, if it's somehow like the equipment I own or something, like perpetually getting taxed on my car, let's say, because I have a car and it still has value, and so I'm going to keep taxing you on it. Again, it's just the reality of any financial situation is it drives people to make decisions. And so my concern was honestly looking at it and saying, I think I'm going to end up having to basically spend savings to cover taxes, because I don't think I have enough money coming in to cover the taxes. So that's the issue. If I take that 70,000, multiply it by 4, the way I understand it, my taxes over a 30-day period are $280,000 now, not 70. And so I have $280,000. I'm not making $280,000 in 2.5 years on that farm. I'm making less than that. So that means to cover the taxes, I suddenly have to pull savings, which means year after year after year, my savings are dropping, and I'm cutting into that $4 million by $150,000 a tax cycle, and then it's just a matter of time. You know, and yes, in my case, if it's 100,000, you know, again, let's make the math easy. You know, I've got like three real life years, and then my savings is depleted. But just knowing that's the direction it's going, for someone like me that's very data driven and so forth, the incentive and the motivation to even bother is kind of sucked away. So I'm hoping I'm misinterpreting what is going out there on there. The only way I'll know is I'll see what my tax bill is. We're supposed to get the tax bill posted on July 1st, and then we have till the end of the month to pay the tax bill. You know, which in theory allows us to make money or whatever, but, you know, I'll be fine. I have enough savings. I know my tax bill is not going to be $4 million, but if my tax bill shows up as $280,000, that's where I say the thing is a possible big impact. You know, I've had a conversation with a few other folks that I'm friends with in the community, and like, is this what you're understanding? But I've been kind of upfront, like, if that's the case, I may have to seriously consider if I even want to continue. Because it would just be soul crushing, frankly, to know that the time I have to put into it and the time I want to play, I can't actually function in the environment that exists anymore. So, you know, it's like, you know, it's one of those, like, some people will just stick their head in the sand like an ostrich and be like, well, wait a minute, what is going on here? Hello? don't understand. Why did it not set up on the line? I mean, it was doing fine for now, and now suddenly it's not, so I don't know. Alright. Because I don't think I've left any other grass. I have not. So I don't know if it was off. Maybe it was off a little bit. But yeah, I got a little confused there because I'm leaving grass on the field. So those are the things happening in the world of FSN, and the only unknown that's directly tied here to generational farming is we've simply been told taxes for generational farming are coming, but they haven't determined what those are going to be. So I do know for certain it's going to have some sort of an impact. I'm just hoping, once again, if it ends up being the same type of thing of land and whatever, and then you're suddenly being taxed on your investments and you don't have any tax deferrable investment options like you do in real life, all those things are going to determine what decisions we make and so forth. Because obviously I know how to operate in the world I have today. You know, and they've been upfront. I mean, I think they're acknowledging the fact that some folks will be unhappy with taxes, and some will be like, cool, it's more realism and so forth. And so to be clear, let me state my position on taxes in general as a citizen of a country. I am not one of those people that are like, oh, taxes, the government should not tax me, it's my money, blah, blah, blah. I understand, as a society, we need to operate. And to operate anything takes money. The way a government gets income is through tax revenue. It is the only way. It is not a charity. It can't be a charity. It can't simply exist on the goodwill of people and say, hey, country, we've got $50 billion in bills we have to pay this year. So there's 300 million of you, and therefore your tax, you know, your portion of this, if we were all going to be fair, you need to pay $10,000 per person in your household this year. Some people would do it. Some people would understand that other people wouldn't do it, and they would have the ability and be willing to pay extra. Although, again, I would argue for those people, like, my share of this is this. I should cover my share. I shouldn't have to cover my neighbor. This is why taxation exists, because if you simply relied on people to willingly give you whatever, poor financial stewards, whatever, you know, I don't have the money, I spent it on a Lamborghini, oh my goodness, you know, I can't pay. This way you don't have an option. It's a law, you have to pay. And similarly, it's the same thing. There's people I know who are like, any tax increase on the ballot, you know, if we've got some property tax increase, which property taxes in the U.S. typically go to services such as, you know, safety services such as fire, police, and so forth, and then mainly education. Like, the biggest part of most people's property tax bill is for schools. And I can't tell you how many neighbors I've had who are older and retired. I don't have any kids in the school system. I don't want this tax increase because I don't care. The schools are useless to me. And my statement, if I was to have a real conversation with them, is, really? You know, A, you used to have children, so you did use the school system. I get they're adults now, and they're not. But secondly, it's kind of, you know, cutting off your nose to spite your face viewpoint of, do you want a bunch of uneducated citizens running around your town who are unable to function and unable to do anything, and you think economically that's going to make the economy that you live in something that's going to be sustainable when businesses are, you know, failing and whatever, and because, you know, people aren't working because they don't know how to do anything, because they can't read, they can't do math. Like, you still get a benefit from the education system in your community, even though you don't actually have children in the buildings. So I just think it's a stupid view of people who think, well, I'm not using the school system, so I shouldn't have to pay taxes, or, yay, let's touch on the third rail of the U.S. I don't need police because I've got 100 guns and I'll defend myself, so I don't want to pay for the police. I don't need them. Okay, well, do you just want to increase the level of lawlessness if we go back to, the Wild West, whatever? We're sitting here watching, I'm sure, and again, if you're in the U.S., although I think it's available worldwide, there's this series Yellowstone, and then there's some spin-offs, kind of prequels for it of, hey, how did the Dutton family get there and so forth. So we're watching 1883 right now, which is right during the point of the American West and so forth, and they're traveling across the prairie, and guess what? Every opportunity that there is, there's some group of people who are trying to steal stuff and thieve from them and take whatever, because there's no police force, there's no law. And so, yeah, they're having to do it themselves, and people constantly are getting killed, and their numbers are dwindling, and, eventually you don't have anybody left because, you've killed 10 bandits, but they've taken 4 of your people with, or vice versa. So, point being, I'm fine with paying taxes, but let's just, I'd like to see that the tax system has some common sense and thought to it. And I'm not saying ours does not. I'm just saying I don't understand it enough that right now, the way I understand it, I think it's far too heavy-handed. And I think for someone like me who isn't in here every waking moment that I possibly can be, and the thing is, like, I haven't taken the time to model anymore, and I'm not going to, because I don't want to know if it works. Like, if I'm asked, hey, what are your thoughts? We've seen you do videos, we've seen you do detailed financial analysis. What do you think about the tax structure? Assuming that, again, I have it all clearly, and if I'm correct in what I'm saying, I would say the tax structure is inappropriate. The tax structure needs to be based on income solely, and really on profit. And fine, you tax my profit at whatever rate you feel you want to tax. And so if you want people to make piddling amounts of profit, but hey, they're still making profit, tax my profit at 75%, and I get to keep 25%. And so it just takes me longer, and it's harder to build this insane empire in FSN, because if I make 100,000, I'm only going to get to keep 25 of it. I have to pay 75,000 in taxes. But at least it's a very clear understanding at that point. And it doesn't penalize someone for being a saver, which is what I think I'm seeing right now, because I'm probably one of the few people that have something like $4 million sitting around in the FSN banks. Most people will probably take every penny they have and buy more land and buy fancier, bigger equipment. But I'm like, my farm operates, it works fine. I can get things done in the 3 hours a week I have to work on a harvest or something. Like, it all fits within my life. But if it suddenly turns into, I need to double crop or something, and I don't think that's what their intent is. I know that's not what their intent is, but it's just right now I'm looking at it saying I'm probably making $160,000 a year in profit, and I'm going to have to pay $280,000 a year in taxes. So I'm going to have to dip $120,000 a year into my savings, and I don't have a way to change that I want to do. I don't want to expand my farm. I don't want to run more of my farm, because then I'm just turning around and paying a contractor and whatever, and then having to manage that. So to me, it's still time that I don't have in my life that I don't want to spend working on that type of thing. So that's where then I have to make a decision if that's really what it is. It's like, do I go do multiplayer somewhere else? Do I do I do something? And again, if I was to do that and I was to make that decision, I would absolutely at least give them the courtesy of explaining, hey, I'm leaving and this is why. Like, the tax rate decision you made drove me out, and let me explain why. And and I might make an attempt to say, hey, here's the situation. Look, if this doesn't get modified, like, I'm going to have to leave. I just don't think that's going to be received with anything that is going to matter. So I think the best case, and probably what makes the most sense, is just make my decision. And if my decision is to leave because I can't survive in this structure here, and it makes this community miserable instead of fun, I would let them know. And I want to play multiplayer. I want to have some sort of reality, but Farmers Only Club or whatever the other big one I know of is, has very similar setup to FSN. It just doesn't have all these extra things that are getting thrown in that just do whatever. I mean, so the challenge I have, even though I'm okay with taxes, is at this point, the problem is what I said about taxes in real life don't exist in FSN. There isn't a government that's giving me services that I could even potentially consume, that are saving me money in my life, because otherwise I'd have to do it myself. I mean, going back to the last example I gave, I don't need the police because I have guns, and I still would have to buy guns. There would be a cost of guns to buy. There'd be a cost of things to keep them maintained and so forth. I don't have to do those things as a citizen because there's a police force that the government provides that means I don't have to spend that money. Similarly to education. Like, I don't have to go buy my own educational supplies and find the time and educate myself and my family. I just send them to public school. So I'm paying a cost and I'm receiving some sort of service. I'm getting Social Security benefits pulled out. Unless something totally ridiculous happens, which again would meet with the same level of fury and anger and irritation that somewhat I'm saying could be what is going on here. I'm going to get that back in my later years of life, and and if I don't, it's we all understand the risk. We all understand the system. I could die of a heart attack at tomorrow, and I'll never have collected a penny of Social Security, even though I've been putting it in the system. I mean, that's the reality. Which again is why some people are like, I'll just save on my own. I don't need this thing, and the government's just robbing me, and people get disability benefits out of that same pool now because they're just lazy and da 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 da. That's the argument from people who want to abolish the social safety net. But it's all easy to say when everything's going well in your life, and yeah, we're all convinced we're somewhat invincible and nothing bad is going to happen to us. But guess what? There's examples all day, all the time, that terrible things happen. We've got 5 people that got crushed in the bottom of the ocean. Yes, they took a risk. They took a risk knowingly. Shame on them. Hey, they got what they deserved, however you want to look at it. But in the end, they didn't jump into that submersible thinking, yep, I'm going to get crushed and die in the next hour. They thought everything was going to be fine. We always think everything's going to be fine. But, so that's the thing. So, like it or not, that this is where the challenge becomes, and where sometimes I'm at odds with folks, is I get we're trying to create the most, I think the wording is the most realistic farming simulator multiplayer community out there. Okay, except at the end of the day, there's pieces of this thing that aren't there. Like, I'm not getting any benefit for paying these taxes, so the taxes are flat out an expense, a new expense that doesn't exist now, that I suddenly have to figure out how to cover. And if I can cover it, that's okay. But as I've shared, I'm concerned that the way it's structured, I can't, without than making changes that A, I may not be able to make in any way, regardless of how much blood, sweat, and tears I put in, or B, I'm not willing to make because, as I've said here time and time again, I'm not looking to make Farming Simulator 100% of my gaming entertainment time. I've got other things I'm doing. I just found another whole franchise of 20 things, literally 20 things. It's 20 titles that were on sale as a bundle for $20, so they're like $1 a piece, that I'm willing to try. And it's not going to be something that's going to make the channel because it's not a sim. It's just something that is of interest to me. That's going to take some of my gaming time. I don't want to be sitting there having this tension in my life of I need to get on my server because the taxes are going to bankrupt me otherwise because I chose not to operate on my farm. I know what I want to do, and I'm not flooding money into my system. So I like the fact that FSN existed and we were able to operate in that environment. I'm hoping, as I've started at the beginning, I'm hoping I am completely wrong and misunderstanding, and my taxes are going to be a few $10,000s of dollars, and they're going to be like taxes in my regular life. They're there. They're not a nothing burger, but they don't change my whole world by being there. I think part of the problem is, again, we're going from no taxes back to here's the realistic tax rate. It's kind of like, getting face punched a little bit. Because trying to get to a realistic rate when you've had none, where over the history of the country or whatever, it's the same thing. It's like the frog in the pot slowly boiling. You've got X number of things going on, and then, hey, we turn the dial a little bit more. Inflation's a great example. Like, everybody, woe is me, whine, bitch, moan, gnash teeth. Let's do something maybe a little less triggering than inflation as a whole right now. Gas prices. The sky is always falling. It's just people don't do the real world understanding of it. Okay, if gas goes up $1 a gallon, you're not buying 100,000 gallons of gas a year. You're not buying 1,000 gallons of gas a year. For most people, you're talking about a minimal amount. You're like, if I take one of my cars, for example, which is a middle-sized car, it's a Hyundai Sonata. If I fill that thing, if that thing is empty, it's a 17-gallon tank. But typically, I'm doing 12 or 15. So let's say 15. Okay, so I am putting 15 gallons of fuel in that car, and I usually fill it every 2 weeks at this point, because we're not, it's used, the kids use it to get to work, but because I'm working from home, I don't have to commute 50 miles a day like I used to. So I've got 30 gallons a month, 360 gallons for the whole year. So even if it goes up $1, which is a huge amount, it's another $360 in the year, in a whole year. Okay, and people are losing their minds when gas goes up a quarter. It just, people don't realize what the real impact of things are, and they overreact in a lot of cases. So, but that's the thing. Pricing changes gradually, and so it goes up. And in that case, let's say, fine, it's a quarter, and let's take it back to, let's say I was commuting again. It might double, as opposed, it's not going to quadruple. So I might suddenly, it cost me $720 because, I'm using 720 gallons of gas a year. But, for most people, it's not this gigantic expense in their life. I get if you're a lower income person, it's a higher percentage of your expenses and so forth. But it's still a percentage increase. And so yes, if we're at $2 a gallon and we go up a dollar a gallon, that's a 50% increase. And doing that over, say, a couple weeks, like we did in Katrina in 2005, it's hard to adjust right there. But if you get there over 30 years, for example, I mean, again, I'm old enough to remember when gas was under $1 a gallon. So at this point, now that we're paying $2 to $3 some dollars a gallon, I mean, gas has gone up, 200+% for me. But it's done so over 40 years almost. So you can adjust as you go along. And all I'm saying here is, we've got a situation where we're going from 0 to 60 in 0 seconds. Like, it's an immediate smash. And so that's the thing. I'm going from 0% taxes to what looks like 14% of everything I own. Not what I'm making income on, which is normally what tax is, but what I'm... Whoops. I thought I had the right thing picked, but I don't. I'm just trying to get all my mowers turned off. So, anyway. So, like I said, I can usually find just stuff to babble on and on about. I mean, this had nothing specifically to do with generational farming. So if you've stuck around, well, thank you. But yeah, I just realized, like, I've mowed this whole field and I'm still here talking, and I still am having an episode here. So, there's a lot here. I'm sure I don't get a ton of comments yet, but I'm sure, this might be one where I get some haters who are like, dude, like, enough. We get the taxes. You're worried about them. I'm just sharing, again, what's on my heart, what I'm thinking about. And to me, the possibility that this is going to be a substantial enough change, and again, we've had taxes before. I'd have to go back and look at the tax rate. That it was. It's just, once again, like I do in life, I don't sit there and go back and say, well, I used to do it this way and it was okay. I mean, I might, if I want to understand, like, am I having an inappropriate reaction to something, that I'm overexcited about something that isn't as significant as it suddenly feels. Hold on, I just want to make sure, again, I'm doing what I need to be doing. And somehow I actually got pretty darn close on where I put the mower down. I'm impressed. I didn't have anything sticking out. I missed a tiny bit, which I knew I would, because obviously the front mower's in front of the back mower, but I'd say I did pretty damn good for the little bit I had. Alright, am I just sitting there now, or it's just hard to tell because it's just been red and red and red and red, and the lag in my little mini map is not coming down. There we go. Now I can finally not freak out about what's happening there, and I can get through this challenging part of my pickup, although I missed some anyway. So let's see. If I go that way, that should hopefully get me enough of the angle, and then hopefully I can grab all this. Cool. But, yeah, no, I positioned it well and so forth, but yeah, I mean, sometimes, sure, I'll go back and I'll revisit things of the past, and this is how it made me feel, and why am I feeling this way now when it didn't make me feel that way before? I mean, we come to events in our life at different points in our life, and we may have a totally different reaction and a totally different acceptance level Again, obviously, if there was something in this field, I wouldn't be doing this because I'd be destroying crop, but this field hasn't been touched in a long time. So, and there's nothing there now, so I'm going to go around, and then he's got grass, and so this I've been doing pretty regularly to get myself set so that I can catch as much of my grass as I can, and I only do it, obviously, this first time around, and then usually I'm more on my field, so it's kind of that reality always as we're working the edges, we're encroaching on things that aren't ours. But we want to be just nice to our fellow neighbor. So that's what, that kind of is the overarching theme here. Like, I'm fine paying taxes. I'm not, I don't want it somehow taken or said that I'm just grumbling. The mature simmer's just bitching because he's got to pay taxes, and it's a community of realism, and he should understand that was coming because leadership has been saying that's been coming forever. I'm okay with doing it, but like anything in the community, let's implement it in a way that it makes sense and it isn't intrusive. And because like I said, I would be floored if what I'm saying is what's going to happen, that if I was to say something to management like, look, I'm having to pull $120,000 in savings out. Yeah, I have millions of dollars right now, but that means eventually I'm going to have no money and I'm not going to be able to pay my taxes, and so I don't want to live in a reality like that, so I'm leaving. That the reaction would be, yep, that's what we intended, see you later. I'm pretty sure that's not what they're driving for. They're not looking to create some insane thing here, like sometimes on mobile games, games in general, I still do and love, Rock Band, and if you've done that on PlayStation or Xbox, and there's kind of the Rock Band rivals, and they have these seasons that we play for 8-9 weeks, and we play against other people, other groups, other bands or teams or whatever. I mean, they're not, I don't know that they're bands because there's up to 10 people in it, and that you're not all playing together. You're actually, honestly, almost never playing together unless you all know each other and whatever. But there are groups there, for example, that are like, if you're not going to play 100 hours a week, you can't join our group. Okay, great. I know that, but, and then I don't, because they'll kick me out if I do. So why bother? And so that's the thing. I don't think FSN is looking to create this onerous structure around Farming Simulator that if you do anything else with your gaming time in your life, you do not belong here, because we expect, you're working, sleeping, or playing Farming Simulator. That's not the environment I expect. They've never said that. They've always been on the, however you want to play, there's a place for you here. It's just right now what I'm seeing with the way it's been posted and then running the math for my specific situation, I'm seeing a situation being created that is not agreeing with that. With the way I play, it doesn't seem there's a place for me with the new tax system, because the new tax system would drive me out if my calculations are correct. So I'm asking for clarification at this point. We'll see what happens. But anyway, so I've gone on enough. I don't have anything more to say on it that's unique. I would just be kind of rehashing and presenting it in a different way in case you didn't understand what I was saying. But at this point, after probably likely an hour of me explaining this, if you don't understand it in the way I explained it, I think it would take something more than I'm going to be able to give to get you to get it. You know, we'd have to sit down individually together, and I'd have to figure out what exactly was still confusing you and then try to address that. And obviously in this format I can't do that, so we're going to simply switch to another topic that I do want to get to that is related to this. So I'm sorry for those who miss it, because they didn't want to sit through my tax lesson and didn't get to something that really is about what's going on here in generational farming. Is I'm going to be curious as we finish off the season and move on and whatever. I honestly am not sure that anyone on my server is still doing anything. The dollar amounts seem to be staying about the same for everybody's farm. I have not seen anybody log in, where it used to be, I think every day I was on, somebody would pop in. That hasn't happened for like 2 or 3 games. I mean, it hasn't happened since the generational farming servers have come back on. I guess, no, let me take that back. It happened once. There was someone who showed up for, well, I guess technically twice, but it was in the same day, in the same session. Someone showed up, was on for less than a minute and left, and it was an FM that's here. So they obviously came in to check something, decided whatever they were checking, they didn't need to do anything, and left. Someone else came on, didn't say a word, but was on for probably 30 minutes and then left. That's all I've seen since we've restarted, which at this point is now, I think, been a full game year, maybe 2, like I don't even remember. I guess it'd be a game year, because we started where I was like, yeah, I think this is year 8, so I think it's been, so it's only been 2 weeks in real life. I understand that, but I'm just simply saying it's strange. It's not the behavior I've seen before, to over a entire year not have seen anyone, and more importantly, not have seen any changes in any farm's financial position that indicates anything is happening other than money is leaking out through the daily production pull that happens because of Farming Simulator and the cost you have of your equipment running and whatever. When I went to get gas for the tractor a little while ago, that tractor with the giant planter and seed hawk behind it, still sitting in exactly the same place that it's been sitting for 4 or 5 years at this point. This little cut in the field next to me, which is what reminded me that I'm coming up on those 2 little black pieces now amongst the harvest. The one year I ran into that harvest, you'd have to go back and see when that was, but I would say it's easily 4 or 5 game years, which means 2 months of real time, perhaps plus. They obviously haven't even come in and replanted after that. Like, they harvested that year that I mistakenly ran into their crop, and they've not been here. So, that's this server. I don't know if that's the same on all the other servers. I do know there's virtually, I checked this morning, because I'm kind of been looking and waiting for some announcement about what's happening and when this generation is ending, because I know we're coming close to when we should be at the max, and there is no main announcement. But then I went into every server channel, and in some cases, well, in all cases, I haven't gone, except to mine, into those channels since we started Generation 2. So some of the channels I went to still showed unread for the 3 servers that ultimately ended up being removed after the first generation because they consolidated us down to the servers we're on. So let me get this over. And yeah, the only thing I was wondering when I had that problem earlier with the cutting was I somehow on this setup, and that's how I had the problem I did, because I was set to this track as the last thing I had done, and I had forgotten to resize, because it's not substantially wider, but I would think I would have hit it much, much earlier than 4 or 5 rows before I suddenly was leaving stuff on the field. So that's where it didn't square with me really well, but just trying to be fully transparent on what's going on in my brain. But anyway, so I went to those channels, and so in the channels that were decommissioned, March 11th, they went back and said, Bravo server is on pause, for example. So in the channel for Bravo server, that was what was there, and that was it. But I haven't gone to some of those things since March 11th. When I go to any of the channels about the servers, there's very little chatter in any of them, including the active servers. So, as I said, there's I don't know how many people are actually still continuing, and I'm not sure if the gap caused by the revamp ended up creating a situation where a lot of people were like, well, I couldn't play for almost 2 weeks in generational farming, and suddenly decided they just weren't going to come back. On our server here, I think I told you that was about the time, and it might have happened just before the revamp. And initially I wrote it off because the FM is part of the operations team, and so they knew a lot of work was coming with the revamp, and maybe, I think they decided, like, I can't do anything here on generational farming. And so at one point we came in and, like, they had a ton of money, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they must have, like, cracked the code, and they found a way to just obliterate us all. And then I saw, well, no, they just literally liquidated their entire farm. And so I guess they're done. And again, because they were on the operations team, I'm like, well, maybe they know, like, we're going to see an announcement in 1 or 2 days saying we're leaving, and they're just ahead of the curve. And they've decided, they're not going to work until whenever we're leaving. But we don't have an announcement. Still don't have an announcement, so that wasn't it. But and if it was like, hey, I need to get through the revamp and then figure it out, they're still there. They've been at 4.6 million. They're still at 4.6 million. They've been there, and it's just, again, been slowly trickling out a few $100s at a time or something, because you've got the daily costs that the game calculates, but that's it. And in that time, I've gone from 1.8 million to the 3.3 million I'm at. So they've been at 4.6 million that long. Again, you could go back and if you've watched the episodes up till now, you've heard me talk about it when they did that. So when that happened and so forth. But there's other people. There's someone who's at 250,000 has been around there the whole time. There's another farm that's at like 850,000. They've kind of been sitting there for a long, long time. So I don't know how many people. And honestly, even on the other servers, the other thing I noticed just the other day was, I'm like, every time I go to log in, like in the first generation, it was not uncommon that across all the servers you would always see 2 of 8, 3 of 8. Like, there were 2 or 3 people on at any given time on a few of the other servers that were doing things. It dawned on me the other day, I'm like, I've been coming in for, since the revamp for 2 weeks now, and I've literally never seen anyone on any of the generational farming servers. And that is, again, that has never happened before. So, now, last night, I think I did see 1 person on each of the other 2 servers. So, there's at least 3 of us. It's, I guess, all I could say from that. But, that's obviously not a lot if that's all we've got. And again, it bodes well for finishing well, because if we suddenly have, 3 people left, finishing in the top 3 is kind of guaranteed. I don't know that it's that severe, but so I don't know what's happening. But that was the one thing I did want to bring up. I've been kind of thinking about it the last couple episodes that I've come up on, and then I've finished, and as I'm editing it, I'm like, I forgot. I'm like, I'm not going to like modify the things and then pin it onto the end. I'll just talk about it next time, and I had forgotten once or twice, but this time I did remember, and most of the silage is gone. I think I've got, when I came in last night, it was early April, so it had just turned into midnight. That's to get to the 3.3 million. I emptied all the silos with what I had, and so I think at most I had 40,000 in one. I think I had 20,000 something in two of them. So we're talking maybe maybe 3 or 4 loads that I still have to sell, which I'll do after I finish collecting this grass up. But that gets you up to speed. That's where we're at right now for generational farming. No impact. So a lot of what I chatted about is just, it's coming, but I know nothing about exactly how it's going to be structured. Because again, they certainly did try. I said to avoid confusion, I stayed away from the details, but now just to help add some clarity, I'm going to go into the details a little bit. So say the 24-day servers compared to the regular ones, not the 24-day enhanced realism, but the 24-day, the tax rate's half. I mean, it's literally just straight math, like, you're taking twice as long, but we want the tax rate to be the same. So we're taxing you at half the rate because you obviously have less harvest options over a 20 or a 30-day period on a 24-day server than you do on a 12-day server. Makes perfect sense. And so, that's what they're doing. So I'm assuming they're going to do some sort of thought on the generational farming servers, but it'll probably be more along the lines of the comparison between enhanced realism and the 24-day servers, because they're on the same calendar. The enhanced realism server's tax rate is 5% versus 1.75% for the 24-day regular servers, and the explanation there is enhanced realism is made to be harder. Again, to me, if I was doing that, I'd have to do the math, but to me, I would think the math flows similarly, given that the 1.75 is set at half, because of the time, at half of what we have. So I would assume the problems continue the same way, where if you're running a low-key operation where you're not going crazy, and you're just kind of doing it for fun and farming when you can, like I'm doing, you might have difficulty, and I would think if you've now effectively tripled the tax rate, that only makes the problem worse. Because I was already on a situation where things were crazy hard, is my understanding from people that I know that are doing it. But once again, they're in a challenge that they've gotten into, and that's a much easier thing to say, hey, I'm not interested, I want to switch back to a 12-day server. Like, you've got other options. My problem is the 12-day server is my only normal FSN option, and if I can't function on that, going to a 24-day server with half the tax rate, the problem doesn't go away. It's exactly the same. It just takes a little longer to die. But anyway, so that being said, the point I'm trying to make there is, I'm assuming that they're going to explain some logic of here's how we've come up with a tax rate for the generational farming servers. Now, if anybody from FSN leadership gets to this point in the video and listens to it, my input, that I would suggest is I don't think we should have taxes on the generational farming servers. I think there's enough going on in this competition with not being able to move equipment, with all the jumping around and whatever, that it's not going to add virtually anything to the experience other than, again, just more another expense to worry about that has no flip side of added, ooh, wow, this has created this exciting new thing we need to think about. Nope, it's just simply another expense. And at this point, I don't know that it would change what anybody's doing, because once again, if it's a flat expense, I want to be making the most money I can. Doing what I'm doing with grass is doing that. You know, that's it. And you know, the only thing it could do, I think, is negative things, where, like, if it's, you know, hey, you're going to penalize someone who's doing a certain type of thing more than another, and then you're in essence conforming the gameplay to what you think is the way it should be played, versus leaving it a little bit more open here, to what people just want to get out of it. So I'm hoping there won't be something similar in generational farming, where they set a rate based on, yeah, and I'm saying all this assuming that my calculations are correct and that the tax rate is just going to bleed me dry. You know, my concern is we would have the same thing, and then I don't have any opportunity in FSN to have an enjoyable experience, is what it comes down to. So I'm hoping that's not the case, but what I was starting to get at is right now there's no impact here. Like, generational farming is continuing. Our biggest unknown is if and when we're moving. I mean, I would hope there's no if involved. The only way there's an if involved is if suddenly this thing has been abandoned and we're just going to be perpetually ignored for the 3 of us that might still be playing here. You know, and again, I understand that. Like, if it happens, it happens. It wouldn't be the first time, I think, that some idea was abandoned in FSN that initially was touted as, here's what we're going to do. But if they suddenly say, you know what, the amount of work it's going to take to get you guys moved and whatever, and keep that up for at least another 5 seasons to get us to the minimum out of the 7 to 10 seasons that we promised, it's just not worth it. So we're just ending generational farming servers, and thanks for your time. Hope you enjoyed it. There's nothing else to see here. I would hope that's not happening. I enjoy what we've got going on here, and just, again, the opportunity to see new maps and so forth, and this gives me a way to do it that doesn't involve me just playing around on a single player server and checking it out on my own. So it gives me a more structured way to do it, and I've been enjoying it. So hopefully we get that news soon and we go on. So with that, I am finally going to wrap this thing up. I hope you've had at least somewhat of an interesting time with whatever parts of this you've listened to, and I will see you next time.